The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the Redemption Springs courthouse, stirring up clouds of red dust that clung to Eleanor Ashford's black mourning dress. She stepped down onto the wooden boardwalk with trembling legs, clutching a worn leather satchel that contained everything she owned in the world. Behind her, 3 months of desperate flight had left her hollow-eyed and thin, her once fine clothing now shabby at the edges. "Miss Ashford?" A barrel-chested man with a silver star pinned to his vest approached, his weathered face kind beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "I'm Sheriff Dawson. We've been expecting you." Eleanor's throat tightened. The proxy marriage arrangement seemed like madness now that she stood on the threshold of it. But madness was better than the alternative, her uncle's creditors seizing her, forcing her into servitude to pay her father's debts, or worse, the marriage they tried to arrange to a 60-year-old merchant with wandering hands and whiskey breath. "Is he, Mr. Holloway here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Before I continue this story, I'd love to ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It truly means so much to us and helps us continue bringing you quality content like this. Also, I'm curious, where are you listening to this story from today? Are you at home, commuting, or maybe working? Please let us know in the comments. The sheriff's expression shifted, something like pity crossing his features. "He's inside, miss. But there's something you should know." "Sheriff." The voice came from the courthouse doorway, deep and steady as bedrock. Eleanor's gaze snapped to the man emerging from shadow into sunlight, and her breath caught. This couldn't be the destitute ranch hand she'd agreed to marry through correspondence. The man who'd written those careful, misspelled letters about needing help on his failing homestead. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders filling out a plain cotton shirt that had seen better days. Dark hair fell to his collar, slightly too long, framing a face all hard angles and sun-darkened skin. But it was his eyes that held her. A startling blue-gray, like storm clouds over the prairie, watching her with an intensity that made heat crawl up her neck. "Miss Ashford," he said, removing his battered hat. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who knew hard work. "I'm Daniel Holloway." She tried to speak, but found her mouth dry as the dust beneath her feet. "We should get the ceremony done," the sheriff said gently. "Judge Morrison is waiting inside." Daniel descended the steps with the fluid grace of a man comfortable in his own body, stopping a respectful distance from her. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the weariness in the set of his jaw. He was older than she'd imagined, perhaps 32 or 33, and there was something in his gaze that spoke of loss. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, his voice for her alone. "If you want to turn around and leave, I'll give you money for the coach. No questions asked." Eleanor's fingers tightened on her satchel. She thought of the uncle's house she'd fled in Boston, the locked room where they'd tried to keep her until the merchant came to collect his unwilling bride. She thought of her mother's grave, barely 6 months old, and her father's before that, lost at sea with all his fortune. "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted, hating how small her voice sounded. Something flickered in Daniel's eyes, not pity, but understanding. He offered his arm, the gesture courtly, despite his rough appearance. "Then let's get married, Eleanor. May I call you Eleanor?" She placed her hand on his forearm, feeling the solid muscle beneath the worn fabric. "Yes, and I'll call you Daniel." The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. Judge Morrison, A portly man with spectacles perched on his red nose mumbled through the words with practiced efficiency. Eleanor's hand shook as Daniel slipped a simple silver band onto her finger. Not the ring from the proxy ceremony conducted by mail, but something different, something that fit perfectly. "I pronounce you man and wife," the judge declared. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Holloway." Daniel's gaze met hers, a question in those storm cloud eyes. Eleanor managed a small nod, and he leaned down, his lips brushing hers with surprising gentleness, a whisper of a kiss that lasted only seconds, but seemed to mark her soul. "Congratulations," the sheriff said, but his tone carried that same strange weight. "Dan, you'll want to." The courthouse door burst open, and a small, wiry man in an expensive suit rushed in, his face flushed. "Am I too late? Has the ceremony been performed?" "Mr. Blackwell," the judge said stiffly, "you are indeed too late. Mr. Holloway is now a married man." The newcomer's face fell, then twisted with barely concealed fury. "This is highly irregular. The will specifically stated." "The will stated that Daniel Holloway must be married by noon today to inherit." A new voice cut in, cool, feminine, and sharp as a blade. A woman swept into the courthouse, her green silk dress a shocking splash of color against the dusty room. She was perhaps 50, beautiful in a hard way, with auburn hair pinned high and eyes like chips of emerald. "And unless my watch has stopped, Sheriff, it's only 11:45. "Mrs. Catherine Blackwell," the sheriff said tightly, "your brother-in-law has fulfilled the terms." Eleanor felt Daniel's hand close around hers, warm and steadying. Her mind reeled. Inherit? Will? What was happening? "Mr. Holloway," the woman, Catherine, said, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she turned to Daniel. "How convenient that you found a bride so quickly. And who might this fortunate woman be?" "My wife," Daniel said simply. "Eleanor Holloway." The name sent a strange thrill through her. Eleanor Holloway. She was no longer Eleanor Ashford, the penniless orphan. She was someone new. "How touching," Catherine said, though her eyes remained cold. "I'm sure she married you for your sterling character and had no idea that as of this morning, you've inherited half of Redemption Springs, including the Silver Star Mine, 3,000 acres of prime grazing land, the hotel, the general store, and controlling interest in the bank." The room spun. Eleanor's knees buckled, and suddenly Daniel's arm was around her waist, supporting her weight as if she weighed nothing. "She needs air," he said curtly. "Judge, are the papers ready? Right here." Morrison produced a sheaf of documents. "Everything's legal and binding. Sign here, both of you." Eleanor's hand shook so badly she could barely hold the pen. Half the town. Daniel owned half the town, and she'd married him thinking he was destitute. "Steady," Daniel murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Just your name. We'll talk after." She signed, Eleanor Margaret Holloway, and watched as Daniel added his bold signature beside hers. "This isn't over," Catherine hissed. She whirled on her companion. "Marcus, find out everything about this girl. There must be something improper about this marriage." "There's nothing improper about it," the sheriff said firmly. "Now clear out, both of you. You've caused enough trouble." As the Blackwells departed in a rustle of silk and muttered threats, Eleanor found herself guided outside to where a buckboard wagon waited. Daniel helped her up onto the seat with careful hands, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. They rode in silence through the town. Her town now, apparently, past storefronts and saloons, past well-dressed citizens who stared openly at the wagon. Eleanor's mind churned with questions, but exhaustion suddenly crashed over her like a wave. She'd barely slept in 3 days, living on stale bread and fear. "We're almost there," Daniel said softly. The wagon climbed a gentle rise, and suddenly spread before them was a sight that stole what remained of Eleanor's breath. A sprawling ranch house, 2 stories of whitewashed wood, with a wraparound porch and flower boxes at every window. Beyond it, corrals and barns in good repair, and in the distance, cattle grazing on golden grassland that stretched to purple mountains. "This is yours?" she whispered. "Ours," Daniel corrected. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "As of about 4 hours ago, I found out yesterday that my uncle, the man who raised me after my parents died, passed away 6 months back. His will only surfaced last week. He left everything to me, but with one condition. I had to be married by noon today." Eleanor turned to look at him, really look at him. "So when you sent those letters, asking for a mail-order bride—" "I was a penniless ranch hand working someone else's land," Daniel finished. "I couldn't offer you much except hard work and honesty." That part was true. He met her gaze steadily. "I didn't lie to you, Eleanor. I just didn't know the truth myself." A laugh bubbled up in her throat, slightly hysterical. "I married you to escape being sold to settle debts. You married me to claim an inheritance. What a pair we make." "A practical pair," Daniel said, but there was something warm in his eyes now, almost like humor. "But the marriage is real, Eleanor. Legal and binding. I won't force you to share my bed, but I will protect you. You have my word on that." Before she could respond, the front door flew open and a woman emerged, 50-ish, round-faced and warm, wiping her hands on an apron. "Daniel Holloway, you get that poor girl inside right now. She looks about ready to fall over." "That's Mrs. Garrett," Daniel said. "She's been housekeeper here for 20 years. And she's right. You need food and rest." He climbed down and came around to help her. But this time, when his hand circled her waist to lift her down, Eleanor felt the strength in them, the way he held her, as if she were precious. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them. This stranger she'd married, this man who'd offered her salvation without knowing he was offering her a kingdom. "Welcome home, Mrs. Holloway," he said quietly. And despite everything, the shock, the confusion, the sheer impossibility of the situation, Eleanor felt something unfurl in her chest, something that might, given time, become hope. Mrs. Garrett fussed over Eleanor like a mother hen, installing her in a beautiful bedroom on the 2nd floor, with windows that overlooked the mountains. A copper tub appeared, filled with steaming water, scented with lavender, and for the first time in months, Eleanor felt clean. "Mr. Daniel's a good man," Mrs. Garrett said, as she laid out a nightgown, beautiful white linen that must have belonged to someone else once. "Lost his wife 3 years ago in childbirth. The baby, too. Nearly destroyed him. He's been living rough ever since, working the land like he was trying to punish himself." Eleanor's heart clenched. "He told you about our arrangement?" "Didn't have to tell me. I've got eyes." Mrs. Garrett's expression softened. "But I also see the way he looks at you. Like maybe, just maybe, there's something worth living for again." After the housekeeper left, Eleanor stood at the window in the nightgown, watching the sunset over land that was now hers. Below, she could see Daniel in the corral, working with a young horse, his movements patient and sure. A knock at the door made her turn. "Come in." Daniel entered, carrying a tray. He'd changed his shirt and combed his hair, droplets of water still clinging to the dark strands. "Mrs. Garrett says you barely touched your dinner. I brought soup." "I'm not very hungry," Eleanor admitted, but she moved to the small table by the window. Daniel set the tray down and poured her a cup of tea with hands that seemed too large for such delicate work. "You need to eat," he said gently. "You're too thin." "I've been running," she said, before she could stop herself, "for 3 months. Ever since my uncle locked me in my room and told me I was to marry a man who terrified me." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he simply nodded. "You're safe now. No one will force you into anything here." "Not even you?" The words came out barely above a whisper. He met her gaze steadily. "Especially not me. This marriage gives you legal protection, Eleanor. My name shields you from your uncle and his schemes. In return, you've given me my inheritance. I'd say we're even. But the will required you to be married. Wouldn't any woman have sufficed?" "Catherine tried to force me to marry her daughter," Daniel said, his voice hard. "A girl of 17 who looks at me like I'm a monster from her nightmares. I'd rather have died than do that to her." He paused. "When your letter came, answering my advertisement, something about your words spoke to me. You wrote honestly about your situation. You didn't try to paint yourself as something you weren't. That took courage." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "I had nothing to lose. Neither did I." Daniel stood, moving to the door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow I'll show you the ranch, if you'd like. You should know what's yours." "Daniel?" He paused, his hand on the doorframe. "Thank you for giving me a way out." His expression softened, and for a moment she glimpsed the man beneath the hardened exterior. "Thank you for giving me a reason to claim my legacy. Sleep well, Eleanor." The next weeks passed in a strange dream. Eleanor discovered that managing a household like this was vastly different from her genteel upbringing in Boston. There were accounts to review, staff to oversee, supplies to order. Mrs. Garrett proved invaluable, teaching her the rhythms of ranch life. Daniel kept his distance, polite and considerate, but careful never to presume. They took meals together, and slowly Eleanor began to learn the man she'd married. He was educated, far more than his letters had suggested, and well-read, with a dry humor that caught her off guard. "Your uncle never married?" she asked one evening over dinner. "Married his work," Daniel replied, cutting into his steak. "The silver star consumed him. He built an empire, but had no one to share it with." He paused. "I think that's why he put the marriage clause in his will. He didn't want me to end up alone like him." "Were you close?" "Once. Before." He trailed off, and Eleanor understood. "Before his wife died. Mrs. Garrett told me," she said gently. "I'm sorry." Daniel's knuckles whitened on his fork. She was sunshine. Everything good in the world. When I lost her and our son, I stopped believing in much of anything." He looked up, and the pain in his eyes made Eleanor's breath catch. "I'm not an easy man to live with, Eleanor. I want you to know that. I'm broken in ways I don't know how to fix." Without thinking, Eleanor reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "We're all broken in some way. Maybe that's why we recognize each other." His hand turned under hers, his calloused palm warm against her softer skin. For a long moment they sat like that, connected by touch and understanding. Then horses thundered into the yard, and the moment shattered. Daniel was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the gun belt he'd started wearing again. "Stay inside," he ordered, already moving toward the door. But Eleanor followed, reaching the porch in time to see 5 rough-looking men dismount in the yard. The leader was a giant of a man, with a scarred face and eyes like dirty ice. "Holloway," he bellowed, "we need to talk about the Silver Star." "My uncle's mine," Daniel said coldly, "and it's not for sale." "Everything's for sale." The man sneered. "Me and the boys have been working that mine for the Blackwells for 5 years. We got rights." "You got wages," Daniel corrected. "Now get off my land." The tension crackled like lightning before a storm. Eleanor's heart hammered as the men's hands drifted toward their weapons. "I don't think so," the scarred man said. "See, Catherine Blackwell says this whole inheritance is fraudulent. Says you tricked some desperate girl into marrying you just for the money." "Is that what she says?" Eleanor's voice rang out clear as a bell. She descended the porch steps, very aware of Daniel's sharp intake of breath. "Then Catherine Blackwell is a liar." The scarred man looked her up and down, his gaze making her skin crawl. "And who might you be, little lady?" "Eleanor Holloway," she said, drawing herself up to her full height. "Daniel's wife, and I married him of my own free will." "Eleanor, go inside," Daniel said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "No." She moved to stand beside him, her shoulder brushing his arm. "This is my home too. I have a right to defend it." The scarred man laughed, ugly and harsh. "Well, well, the little bride has teeth." He spat in the dirt. "Don't matter. The Blackwells want this land, and what the Blackwells want, they get." "Not this time," Daniel said softly, and there was something in his voice that made even the scarred man pause. "You have until I count to 3 to get on those horses and ride out. After that, I start shooting. There's 5 of us and 1 of you." "2 of us," Eleanor said firmly. Daniel's hand found hers, squeezed once, a gesture of gratitude and warning both. 1. The men shifted, hands hovering over gun butts. 2. "You're making a mistake, Holloway." 3. Daniel's gun cleared leather so fast Eleanor barely saw it move. The shot cracked across the yard, kicking up dirt inches from the scarred man's boot. The horses screamed and shied, and suddenly the men were scrambling to mount. "Next time, I won't miss," Daniel called after them as they galloped away. "And tell Catherine Blackwell, if she wants my land, she'll have to kill me for it." As the dust settled, Eleanor realized she was shaking. Daniel holstered his gun and turned to her, his face a mask of fury. "Don't ever do that again," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Do what?" "Put yourself in danger for me, for this place. It's not worth your life." Eleanor lifted her chin. "You're my husband. This is my home. I'll defend both." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, admiration, and something darker, more intense. "You're not property, Eleanor. You don't owe me protection." "I know I'm not property," she said softly. "But I chose this. I chose you. That means something to me, even if it doesn't to you." Daniel's hand came up, his fingers gentle as they traced her jaw. "It means everything to me," he said roughly. "That's the problem. I can't lose someone else. I won't survive it." "Then don't lose me," Eleanor whispered. "Fight with me, not for me." For a heartbeat they stood frozen, the air between them electric with possibility. Then Daniel stepped back, his hand falling away. "You should go inside," he said, his voice hoarse. "I need to ride to town, tell the sheriff what happened." Eleanor wanted to argue, to push past his walls, but she could see the fear in his eyes, fear of caring, of losing, of hoping again. So she simply nodded. "Be careful. Always am." She watched him saddle his horse and ride out, the man she'd married becoming a silhouette against the setting sun. And she wondered if she'd ever find a way through the thorns he'd wrapped around his heart. The next morning, Eleanor woke to find Mrs. Garrett hovering by her bed, wringing her hands. "What's wrong?" Eleanor sat up quickly. "It's Mr. Daniel. He didn't come home last night." Fear, cold and sharp, stabbed through Eleanor's chest. "What?" "Sheriff Dawson just rode up. There's been trouble at the Silver Star Mine." Eleanor threw on clothes with shaking hands and raced downstairs to find the sheriff in the parlor, his hat in his hands and his face grave. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, "there's been a cave-in at the mine. Daniel and 3 workers are trapped inside." The world tilted. "Is he alive?" "We don't know. The entrance is blocked. We need men and equipment to dig them out safely, but it could take days." "Then we start now," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. "Get every able-bodied man in town. Offer double wages. I don't care what it costs." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "Mrs. Holloway, my husband is in that mine, Sheriff, and I will move heaven and earth to get him out. Do I make myself clear?" Something like respect crossed his weathered face. "Yes, ma'am. Crystal clear." The next 2 days were a blur of activity. Eleanor organized food and supplies for the rescue workers, coordinated shifts, and refused to leave the mine entrance. She slept in a chair in the mine office, ate when Mrs. Garrett forced food on her, and prayed with an intensity she hadn't felt since her mother died. Catherine Blackwell appeared on the second day, dressed in black as if for a funeral. "Such a tragedy," she murmured, her voice dripping false sympathy. "Of course, with Daniel gone, the inheritance will revert to the Blackwell family." "My husband is not gone," Eleanor said, her voice cold as winter steel. "And when he comes out of that mine, the first thing I'll do is tell him how eager you were to collect his corpse." Catherine's mask slipped, revealing naked hatred. "You're a nobody, girl, a penniless orphan who trapped the dying man into marriage. When this is over, get out." Eleanor stood, her hands clenched into fists. "Get off my land, now." "Your land?" Catherine laughed. "You really think—" "I think you'd better leave, Mrs. Blackwell." Sheriff Dawson interrupted, appearing at Eleanor's side. "Before I arrest you for trespassing." After Catherine left in a swirl of silk and fury, the sheriff touched Eleanor's arm gently. "You've got steel in your spine, Mrs. Holloway. Daniel chose well." "He's alive," Eleanor said fiercely. "I know he is. I'd feel it if he was gone." On the 3rd day, just as dawn broke over the mountains, a shout went up from the mine entrance. Eleanor ran, her skirts tangled around her legs, her heart in her throat. "We broke through!" a worker yelled. "They're alive!" Eleanor pushed through the crowd, reaching the entrance just as the first man emerged, blinking in the sunlight. Then another, and another, and finally, Daniel. He was covered in rock dust, blood seeping from a gash on his temple, limping heavily. But his eyes found hers across the crowd, and the look in them stole her breath. Eleanor ran to him, and he caught her with his good arm, pulling her against his chest, despite the pain it must have caused. "You're alive," she sobbed into his shirt. "You're alive," he said. "Had to be," he said roughly, his face buried in her hair. "I had something worth coming back to." The doctor examined Daniel in the mine office, declaring him battered and bruised, but miraculously unbroken. Eleanor refused to leave his side, her hand clasped in his as the doctor worked. "Fool thing to do," the doctor muttered, bandaging Daniel's head. "Going into that mine alone at night." "I heard the supports were failing," Daniel said. "Wanted to check before the next shift." found evidence someone had been sabotaging them. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Catherine, or someone working for her. Daniel's jaw tightened. When the cave-in happened, I managed to get the 3 workers to a safe pocket. We had just enough air and water to last until help came. His gaze found Eleanor's. I kept thinking about you, about how I'd never told you. Don't, she said softly. You're here now. That's what matters. But Daniel shook his head. I need to say this while I have the courage. These 3 days, trapped in the dark, all I could think about was that I'd wasted the time we had. I was so afraid of being hurt again that I didn't let myself see what was right in front of me. Daniel, I love you, Eleanor. The words came out raw and honest. I don't know when it started. Maybe that first day when you stood next to me against those men. Or maybe when you signed your name beside mine, trusting a stranger with your future. But I love you, and I'm asking, no, I'm begging for a chance to make this marriage real. Not just on paper, but in every way that matters. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. You stubborn, impossible man. Did you really think I stayed by that mine for 3 days because of a legal arrangement? His breath caught. Eleanor? I love you too, she whispered. I've been falling for you since the moment you offered to let me leave, to give me money and ask nothing in return. You showed me what a good man looks like, Daniel Holloway, and I don't want to spend another day pretending this marriage is just practical. Daniel's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. Together, he said softly. Together, she agreed. And when he kissed her this time, it was nothing like that first chaste brush of lips at the courthouse. This kiss was deep and slow and full of promise, a claiming and a surrender all at once. Eleanor felt it all the way to her toes, felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. Someone cleared their throat loudly, and they broke apart to find the doctor grinning like a fool. I'd say you're fully recovered, Mr. Holloway, he said, though you might want to find somewhere more private to Folks, I want you to meet my wife, my real wife in every sense of the word, Eleanor Holloway, who kept this rescue going when everyone else wanted to give up. His voice rang with pride. She's got more courage in her little finger than I have in my whole body. The workers cheered, and Eleanor blushed, but she didn't look away from Daniel's gaze. Sheriff Dawson stepped forward. About the sabotage, Dan. We found evidence linking those men from the other day to the cave-in. They've been arrested, and they're singing like canaries about Catherine Blackwell's involvement. Good, Daniel said grimly. I want charges filed. She nearly killed 4 people trying to steal my inheritance. Our inheritance, Eleanor corrected softly. Daniel's expression softened, and he brought her hand to his lips. Our inheritance, he agreed. The trial of Catherine Blackwell and her conspirators became the talk of Redemption Springs. Eleanor sat in the courtroom every day, Daniel at her side, as evidence mounted of bribery, sabotage, and attempted murder. Catherine maintained her innocence with icy hauteur, but the workers' testimony was damning. When the judge finally pronounced her guilty, sentencing her to 10 years in prison, Eleanor felt no triumph, only relief that the threat was finally past. It's over, Daniel said as they left the courthouse, his arm around her waist. She can't hurt us anymore. We hurt ourselves more than she ever could, Eleanor said quietly. All that time wasted being afraid. Daniel stopped on the courthouse steps, turning her to face him. Then let's stop wasting time. Marry me again, Eleanor. A real wedding this time, with all our friends and the whole town watching. Let me stand up in front of God and everyone and choose you, the way I should have from the beginning. Eleanor's throat tightened with emotion. I thought we were already married. We are, but I want to do it right this time. I want you in a white dress with flowers in your hair. I want to speak vows that matter and mean them with everything I am. His thumb brushed her cheek. I want to give you the wedding you deserved, not a hasty ceremony to beat a deadline. Yes, Eleanor whispered. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The wedding took place on a golden September afternoon in the meadow behind their house. Eleanor wore a dress of cream silk that Mrs. Garrett had sewn with loving care, with wildflowers woven into her dark hair. Daniel stood at the makeshift altar in a new suit, his eyes shining as he watched her walk toward him on Sheriff Dawson's arm. The entire town had turned out, ranchers and miners, shop owners and farmers, all the people who'd watched this unlikely marriage transform into something beautiful. Dearly beloved, the minister began, but Eleanor barely heard the words. She was lost in Daniel's gaze, in the love she saw there, open and unguarded at last. When it came time for the vows, Daniel took her hands in his. Eleanor, when you stumbled off that stagecoach 3 months ago, I was a dead man walking. I'd forgotten how to feel, how to hope, how to live. You brought me back. You gave me a reason to claim my future instead of hiding from it. His voice roughened with emotion. You're the strongest person I know, and I promise to spend every day of my life being worthy of your trust. I promise to fight beside you, not for you. I promise to love you with everything I am, broken pieces and all. Eleanor's tears fell freely now, but they were tears of joy. Daniel, you showed me what it means to be truly free. Not free from responsibility or hardship, but free to choose my own path, to stand on my own feet. You never tried to save me. You gave me the tools to save myself. She smiled through her tears. You're not broken, my love. You're beautiful, scars and all, and I promise to spend every day showing you the man I see, the man who's patient with frightened horses and kind to everyone, who works harder than anyone I know, and who loves with a fierce loyalty that takes my breath away. I choose you, Daniel Holloway, today and every day. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister said, beaming. Again, you may kiss your bride, again. The crowd laughed, but Daniel was already pulling Eleanor into his arms, his kiss tender and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, cheers erupted across the meadow. Together, Daniel whispered against her lips. Together, Eleanor agreed. The celebration lasted until the stars came out, dancing and laughter filling the autumn air. But eventually, Daniel and Eleanor slipped away to the house, climbing the stairs to the bedroom that would finally, truly be theirs. Daniel paused at the threshold, suddenly uncertain. Eleanor, if you need more time. She silenced him with a kiss, her hands framing his face. I've waited long enough, she said softly. I want this. I want you. Go slow, he murmured, as his hands found the buttons of her dress. Tell me if anything hurts. I'll die before I hurt you, she whispered. Eleanor promised, her own hands working the buttons of his shirt. Their coming together was tender and passionate, awkward and perfect, a discovery of each other that left them both breathless and laughing and utterly in love. Afterward, Eleanor lay with her head on Daniel's chest, listening to his heartbeat and feeling more at peace than she ever had in her life. I can't believe you thought you were penniless, she murmured. And I can't believe I married you thinking the same thing. Daniel's laugh rumbled through his chest. Best mistake we ever made. Not a mistake, Eleanor corrected, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. Fate. Fate, he agreed, his arms tightening around her. And I wouldn't change a single moment of it. 5 years later, Eleanor stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. In her arms, their daughter, Sarah Eleanor, named for the woman who'd come before and the woman who'd given Daniel a second chance at love, cooed and grabbed at her mother's hair. "There's Daddy," Eleanor said, pointing to the rider approaching from the south pasture. Daniel dismounted in the yard, older now and even more weathered, but his eyes still lit up when he saw his wife and daughter. He bounded up the porch steps and swept them both into his arms, his kiss for Eleanor still making her knees weak after all this time. "How was town?" she asked. "Good. The new school is nearly finished." He tickled Sarah under the chin, making her giggle. "And I ran into Sheriff Dawson. He says Catherine's been released early for good behavior, but she's headed east. Wants nothing more to do with Redemption Springs." "Can't say I blame her," Eleanor said. "This town has a way of demanding honesty from people." Daniel's expression grew serious. "Eleanor, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart skipped. "What is it?" "I got a letter today, from your uncle in Boston." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "He's dying, and he wants to see you." Eleanor took the letter with shaking hands. Scanning the lines, written in her uncle's spidery script, he apologized for his treatment of her, begged her forgiveness, wanted to make amends before he passed. "What do you want to do?" Daniel asked quietly. Eleanor looked at her husband, at their daughter, at the life they'd built together from desperation and faith. "I want to forgive him," she said finally. "Not for his sake, but for mine. I don't want to carry that anger anymore." "Then we'll go," Daniel said. "Together." "Together," Eleanor agreed and kissed him again, tasting the salt air and sage, tasting the future they built from ruins and hope. Because that's what love was, she'd learned. Not a rescue or a transaction, but a choice made every single day. To stand together, to fight together, to build something beautiful out of broken pieces. And she chose Daniel Holloway, her penniless ranch hand who'd inherited half a town and given her the whole world. The journey to Boston took 2 weeks by train. Little Sarah alternating between delight at the scenery rushing past the windows and fussing in the unfamiliar confines of their private compartment. Eleanor found herself growing tenser the closer they got to the city of her birth. Memories she'd thought long buried, rising to the surface like ghosts. "Talk to me," Daniel said on their last night before arrival, as they lay together in the narrow sleeping berth with Sarah tucked in her cradle beside them. "I can feel you pulling away." Eleanor turned in his arms, studying his face in the dim lamplight. 5 years of marriage had taught her she couldn't hide from this man. He read her too well. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of going back to that house. Afraid of seeing him again and finding out that all the anger I've let go will come flooding back." Daniel's hand stroked her hair, the gesture soothing. "Then we'll leave. We don't owe him anything, Eleanor. Not forgiveness, not closure, nothing. You already escaped that place once. You don't have to walk back into it." "But I want to," Eleanor said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Not for him, for me. I need to see that the girl who fled in terror is gone, that I'm stronger now." "You were always strong," Daniel murmured. "You just didn't know it yet." The next morning, their hired carriage rolled through Boston's cobblestone streets, past the grand houses of Beacon Hill, where Eleanor had once attended parties and pretended to belong. The city felt smaller now, less intimidating, as if her years in the vast western landscape had given her a different perspective. The carriage stopped before a narrow brownstone, its windows dark despite the morning hour. Eleanor's breath caught. She'd lived here from age 12 to 18, after her parents' deaths, and she'd never felt welcome. "Ready?" Daniel asked, helping her down while their driver lifted Sarah from her mother's arms. "No," Eleanor admitted, "but let's go anyway." The door opened before they could knock, revealing a haggard woman in a nurse's uniform. "Mrs. Holloway, Mr. Ashford is expecting you. Please, this way." The house smelled of sickness and decay, medicine and old regrets. Eleanor climbed the stairs with Daniel's steadying hand at her back, Sarah babbling happily in his arms, oblivious to the tension. Her uncle's bedroom was dark and stuffy, heavy curtains blocking the sun. The figure in the bed was almost unrecognizable. The robust, tyrannical man she remembered had shrunk to a skeletal shadow, his skin yellow and papery. The voice was a whisper, nothing like the boom that used to shake the house. "Is that truly you?" "It's me, Uncle Richard." Eleanor moved closer, her heart racing. Daniel stayed by the door with Sarah, giving her space, but ready if she needed him. "You look well," her uncle said, his eyes tracking over her fine traveling dress, the confidence in her bearing. "The West agrees with you." "It does." Eleanor pulled a chair to his bedside, sitting with her hands folded in her lap. "I got your letter." "I'm dying," he said bluntly. "The doctors give me weeks, perhaps days. I needed to tell you I was wrong." Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes. "Your father was my little brother. When he died, I promised myself I'd take care of you. But I failed. I was so buried in my own bitterness about my losses, my debts, that I tried to sell you like property to save myself." Eleanor felt the old anger stir, but it was distant now, muted. "You locked me in my room. You were going to force me to marry a man who looked at me like I was meat." "I know." His hand, shaking and liver-spotted, reached for hers. Eleanor let him take it, feeling the fragility of his grip. "I told myself it was practical, that many marriages are arranged, that you'd learn to accept it. But the truth is, I was a coward, and I'm sorry. So deeply, profoundly sorry." "Why now?" Eleanor asked. "Why wait until you're dying to say these things?" "Because dying strips away all the lies we tell ourselves," her uncle said. "And because I heard you'd made something of yourself out there, married well, inherited a fortune, I thought perhaps you might have found it in your heart to forgive a foolish old man." Eleanor looked back at Daniel, who'd moved to the window with Sarah, letting her look at the street below. Her husband caught her gaze and gave her a small nod. Whatever she decided, he supported her. "I do forgive you," Eleanor said slowly, turning back to her uncle. "Not because you deserve it, but because holding on to that anger only hurt me. I've built a life I love, with a man who respects me and a daughter who'll never know what it's like to be treated as property. You can't take that from me now, and I won't let the memory of you poison it." Her uncle's tears flowed freely now. "Thank you," he whispered. "That's more grace than I had any right to expect." They sat in silence for a moment, and then her uncle's gaze moved past her to Daniel. "Is that your husband?" "Yes, Daniel Holloway." "And the child?" "Our daughter, Sarah." Eleanor felt pride swell in her chest. "She's 2 years old and fearless as they come." Would you Would you let me meet them? Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. She beckoned Daniel over, and he approached with Sarah on his hip, the little girl's eyes wide as she stared at the sick man. "Mr. Ashford," Daniel said, his voice carefully neutral. "Sir." "You're the man who saved my niece," her uncle said. "I should thank you." "I didn't save her," Daniel replied firmly. "She saved herself. I just gave her a safe place to land." Something like respect flickered in the old man's eyes. "You're a good man. Better than I ever was." He looked at Sarah, his expression softening. "She's beautiful. She has Eleanor's eyes. And her mother's courage," Daniel added, pressing a kiss to Sarah's dark curls. "There's something else," her uncle said, his voice growing weaker. "The reason I really asked you here. Eleanor, I have no other living relatives, no children of my own. When I die, everything goes to you. This house, my remaining investments, everything. It's not much, not compared to what your husband has built, but it's rightfully yours. Your father's share of the family fortune." Eleanor felt stunned. "Uncle Richard, it should have been yours years ago," he interrupted. "Instead, I tried to steal it, to use you to save myself from my own poor choices. This is me trying to make it right, inadequate though it is. I don't know what to say. Say you'll use it well. Say you'll give that beautiful child the childhood you should have had." His eyes closed, exhaustion overtaking him. "That's all I ask." Eleanor stood, Daniel's hand finding hers immediately. "Rest, Uncle. We'll be in town for a few days. I'll come back tomorrow." "Eleanor?" Her uncle's voice stopped her at the door. "I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat, and let Daniel guide her from the room. They stayed in Boston for 10 days, long enough to see her uncle buried in the family plot beside her parents, and to begin sorting through his affairs. The house would be sold, the investments liquidated. Eleanor discovered her uncle had been more honest in his letter than she'd expected. There wasn't much left, but what remained would provide a comfortable trust for Sarah's future. On their last night in the city, Daniel took Eleanor to dinner at one of Boston's finest restaurants. She wore a gown of deep blue silk, and he donned a suit that made— "I'm grateful for the woman who answered my advertisement, who saw past my clumsy spelling and poor prospects to the man underneath." "There were no poor prospects," Eleanor said with a smile. "You just didn't know it yet." "True enough." Daniel's expression grew serious. "Eleanor, there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about. The trip here, seeing you face your past, it made me think about my own." Eleanor felt a flutter of concern. "What do you mean?" "Sarah was my first wife's name," he said quietly. "When you suggested it for our daughter, I was honored, moved. But I wonder sometimes if it's fair to you, having that reminder." "Daniel, let me finish." He squeezed her hand. "Sarah Brennan was a good woman, and I loved her. But what I felt for her it was young love, innocent. We grew up together, married at 20, and we were happy in a simple way." He paused, his eyes intense on hers. "What I feel for you is different, deeper. It's a love forged in fire, built on respect and partnership and choice. You're not her replacement, Eleanor. You're the great love of my life." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I've never worried about her memory," she said softly. "How could I? She helped make you the man you are, the man I fell in love with. And our daughter carrying her name feels right, like we're honoring the past while building our future." "Have I told you lately that you're remarkable?" Daniel asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Not since this morning," Eleanor teased, dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. They finished dinner in comfortable silence, then walked back to their hotel through Boston's gaslit streets. The city was beautiful in its way, Eleanor acknowledged, but it didn't feel like home. Home was a ranch house with a wraparound porch, mountains on the horizon, and the smell of sage on the wind. "Ready to go back?" Daniel asked, as if reading her thoughts. "More than ready," Eleanor confirmed. "I got the closure I needed here. But my life is in Redemption Springs now, our life." The next morning, they boarded the westbound train with Sarah and their luggage. As Boston disappeared behind them and the landscape opened up, Eleanor felt something settle in her chest, a sense of completion, of circles closed and new chapters beginning. "Mama," Sarah called from her seat by the window, pointing at a bird flying alongside the train. "Bird!" "Yes, sweetheart, that's a bird," Eleanor said, moving to sit beside her daughter while Daniel stretched out on the opposite bench. "She's talking more every day," Daniel observed with pride. "She gets that from you," Eleanor said. "You never stop talking to her, explaining everything." "I want her to know the world is full of wonders," Daniel said, "and that she can ask about any of them." Eleanor's heart swelled. This was the man she'd married, thoughtful, patient, devoted. And watching him with their daughter, she fell in love with him all over again. 3 days into their journey, as they changed trains in Chicago, Eleanor noticed a woman watching them from across the platform. She was young, perhaps 25, and beautiful, with golden hair and a fashionable traveling suit. But it was the way she stared at Daniel that made Eleanor's protective instincts flare. "Daniel," Eleanor murmured, nodding toward the woman. He turned, and Eleanor saw the exact moment recognition hit. His face went pale, then flushed red. "Dear God," he whispered, "that's Margaret Brennan, Sarah's younger sister." Before Eleanor could respond, the woman was crossing the platform toward them, her expression a mixture of shock and something darker. "Daniel Holloway," she said, her voice carrying clear as a bell. "I heard you were dead. Margaret." Daniel's arm tightened around Eleanor's waist. "I'm very much alive. This is my wife, Eleanor, and our daughter, Sarah." Margaret's eyes flicked over Eleanor, with barely concealed disdain, before settling on the child in Daniel's arms. Her face crumpled. "You named her Sarah," she said, her voice breaking. "How could you? How could you replace my sister and then name your child after her, like some sort of—" "Careful," Daniel said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're speaking about my wife and daughter." "Your wife?" Margaret's laugh was bitter. "My sister wasn't cold in her grave 6 months before you ran off west. We thought you'd killed yourself in grief. Instead, you were what? Looking for a new bride?" Eleanor felt anger surge through her veins. She stepped forward, putting herself between Daniel and this woman's venom. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Margaret's eyes blazed. "I know Daniel Holloway loved my sister. I know he swore he'd never love anyone else. And here he is with a replacement wife and a replacement family, pretending Sarah never existed." "I have never pretended Sarah didn't exist," Daniel said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "I grieve for her every single day, but I didn't die with her, Margaret, as much as I wanted to. And I won't apologize for finding a reason to keep living. You married a penniless ranch hand by proxy, not knowing he'd inherit half the town by dawn," Margaret spat, her gaze on Eleanor. "That's what I heard. How convenient for you." The words hit Eleanor like a slap, her own story twisted into something ugly. But she lifted her chin, refusing to be ashamed. I married Daniel because I was desperate, and he offered me a chance at a new life. He married me to meet the terms of his uncle's will. And from that practical beginning, we built something real, something beautiful, something your sister would have wanted for him. Margaret flinched as if struck. Don't you dare speak for my sister. Someone needs to, Eleanor said firmly, because I don't believe she'd want Daniel to have spent the rest of his life mourning. I don't believe she'd want him to deny himself love and family and happiness because she couldn't be here to share it. Her voice softened. I'm sorry for your loss, Margaret, truly, but your grief doesn't give you the right to poison his future. For a long moment, Margaret simply stared at her. Then her shoulders sagged, and tears spilled down her cheeks. I miss her, she whispered. Every day, I miss her. And seeing him happy, it just feels like she's being forgotten. She's not forgotten, Daniel said quietly. He shifted Sarah in his arms, the little girl watching the exchange with wide eyes. This child carries her name. Eleanor speaks of her with respect and honor. And his voice caught, I will always love Sarah Brennan. She was my first love, the girl who taught me what it meant to care for someone beyond myself. But Eleanor is my second chance, and I love her with every bit as much intensity. The heart doesn't have a limit, Margaret. It expands to hold what we give it. Margaret wiped her eyes, looking at little Sarah. May I hold her? Just for a moment? Daniel looked at Eleanor, who nodded. He carefully passed their daughter to Margaret, who cradled the child with shaking hands. Hello, little one, Margaret whispered. You're beautiful, and your mama is right. My sister would have wanted your daddy to be happy. She pressed a kiss to Sarah's forehead, then returned her to Daniel's arms. I'm sorry for what I said. You didn't deserve that. We understand, Eleanor said gently. Grief makes us say things we don't mean. Margaret nodded, then looked at Daniel one more time. Be happy, Daniel. Both of you. That's what Sarah would have wanted. She walked away then, disappearing into the crowd, and Eleanor felt Daniel sag against her. Are you all right? She asked. I will be, he said, thanks to you. He kissed her temple, holding both his girls close. How do you always know exactly what to say? Practice, Eleanor said with a small smile. And the knowledge that we chose this life together. No one gets to make us feel guilty for that choice. They boarded their train a few minutes later, settling into their compartment as Chicago faded behind them. Sarah fell asleep in Eleanor's arms, worn out by the excitement, and Daniel pulled Eleanor close against his side. When we get home, he said quietly, I want to plant a garden. Roses, like Sarah, my Sarah, loved. But also wildflowers, like you brought into my life. A place where past and present can grow together. Eleanor looked up at him, this man who'd given her everything. Safety, home, love, and the freedom to be herself. That sounds perfect, she whispered. And as the train carried them west toward home, toward the life they'd built from desperation and faith, Eleanor knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they'd face them the same way they'd faced everything else. Together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Eleanor and Daniel's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.